Hello, this is Uncle Tickles, and you are listening to New Dad. Today is our long-awaited second mailbag episode where I take questions from you, the listener, and you, the listener, can do me a huge solid by rating and reviewing New Dad wherever it is you may listen or watch. It does make an enormous difference. And I'll tell you what, there was an enormous difference between Mailbag 1 and Mailbag 2. Largely in part because for Mailbag 1, I had to pound down some doors and really enlist the help of some friends to round out the questions for that mailbag. And Mailbag 2 happened much more organically. A lot of the questions we received were from people I either didn't know or didn't know were listening to the podcast. So thank you to Megan in Milwaukee, Pete in Wisconsin, who I do hope is Jesus Pete. Hoping to have, if it is Jesus Pete, we're hoping to have you on the show for an episode. I'm just trying to cook up the right one, and hopefully that name is enticing enough for you to want to tune in for that episode. William in New Jersey, Jeff, Graham, and Ashley from Illinois, and Patrick in Indianapolis. Thank you for tuning in. Those sort of things make the whole experience worthwhile and much more gratifying. I do enjoy this, but part of the reason I'm doing this is I guess I want this to kind of snowball and grow into something bigger than just being listened to by my close family and friends. So these things really help the momentum of that. One other thing we want to talk about before we jump into the questions. It's a 100-mile bike ride from Chicago to Lake Geneva, which is being put together to raise awareness and funds to fight social injustice. 100% of the proceeds go directly to the Color of Change organization. For details regarding the ride or becoming a sponsor, please contact New Dad, or you can reach out directly to the race organizer on Instagram. We'll show his contact info if you're watching on YouTube. Otherwise, his Instagram name is at beezknees13. That's BEEZKNEEZ 1313. Definitely a cause that New Dad supports. So let's get to these questions. Megan from Milwaukee asks, you have said in past episodes you had a hard childhood. Can you elaborate and talk more about how you think that has shaped you as a dad? Yeah, and I do want to say that, and hopefully I've mentioned this before, I fully am aware that as hard as my childhood may have been, that it's much more easy than a lot of people's, and it's harder than some. And where I grew up, it was probably harder than most of my friends, but that doesn't mean it was harder than the people, a lot of kids that were in my town. I went to a very small school. There were 2 other public schools that we didn't go to, or that, had much bigger classes. And I'm sure had I gone to one of those, then I probably would have found much more, company as far as, my parents' economic class and people who I could relate to on that level. So I think that's important to mention, and it's, my tough childhood, that was a product of having a mom who dealt with substance abuse and a dad with an explosive temper, and some of the things that come with that. I'll leave that at that. But how it shaped me, well, I've wanted my children, my sons, to always see me as someone that they can come to, and I guess the absence of fear. I want them to love and respect me. I want them to look at me as the type of person that they would want to be when they grow up. All those things. And I'm not saying my parents didn't want that. I think those are things every parent wants when they start off, with kids. But I think my parents had me super young, and when you're super young and you're just treading water, to just survive, and a lot of that stuff goes out the window, and you go into survival mode. And I think they were doing the best they could, but I would say one of the biggest things that probably led me to do was wait to have kids. Me and Lita waited, um, much later in life than my parents did. They were 22 and they had me, and when Shep was born, I was 36 at the youngest, 30, probably closer to 37, so 36, 37. Um, so yeah, I mean that's probably the biggest thing it shaped, and I think our kids are gonna probably I think that'll be advantageous to both of our kids versus what the situation we were thrust into as kids. Um, and it was just tough then, and I don't know any other way to say it, but um, there was a while there before my mom, I think probably from first grade to third grade where we were latchkey kids where I was kind of in charge of a brother and sister who were younger than me, and I wasn't much older than them, and it was it was just kind of a crazy time. Because of that, me and my siblings have been super close, and I want my sons to be super close, and any future kids that we have, I want them to have the relationship I have with my siblings. So, as a dad, I see that. I think another thing that we didn't have a lot, and I grew up wanting a lot and seeing people around me do things like vacations. And when I say I wanted a lot, I don't think I was wanting these crazy extravagant gifts, but it was just these other experiences is what it was these experiences, being able to go to Great America, or these other places that we just weren't able to go to, and I want my kids to have that. Balancing that with like not spoiling them, that's my challenge. That's the cross I'm going to have to bear, and I guess that's if that's one of the crosses you're bearing, it's a pretty light cross to bear. So I hope that answers the question, and I hope I didn't dodge the elaborating too much with some of that. Also, I do want to tiptoe because my hope is to have my mom and dad on the show as guests at some point, and I want to get into it, and I want them to be comfortable with how much we share. Um, I'm sure they're already wishing I would have shared less than I have this season. So, thank you, Megan, for that question. Sam from Chicago asks, "When is Papa Pappas coming on the show?" Um, I kind of alluded to the fact that I definitely want to have them on. This shelter in place quarantine has definitely made me do some scrambling, and I had an idea of what this first season was going to look like, and it was not always the clearest idea, but I had a pretty good outline, and a lot of that was turned upside down because I couldn't use the studio or the studio, the office as a studio and have guests come in. So and someone like Papa Pappas is not going to be the best remote guest, just mainly because of technology being an issue and also his lack thereof. He's one I definitely want to have in house, and I can't promise that's going to happen, but I will say that I do expect the last episode of the first season to shoot on Father's Day. So not making promises. He may be part of that episode, but it could be a thing that could happen. So fingers crossed, and we'll see. There's so much going on right now that I can't promise that, but I really would hate to end this first season without him on. So Sam in Chicago. Let's pray to sweet baby Zeus that he is. So we have two questions that kind of go hand in hand in the way I want to answer them. Um, Laura in Ohio asks, "Will we see your wife Lita on the show again?" And Jennifer in Texas asks, "How did you and your wife meet?" So yes, resounding yes to Lita being back on the show. 100% she'll be on the last episode of the season, or at least the last progress report episode, trying to figure out how we want to do all that. That last episode looking like we're going to record on Father's Day. So only a few weeks away. How did we meet? So I don't really want to answer that totally. And there's two reasons. And I'm going to get to both of them right now. And one of them is a potential guest we may have who is instrumental in in kind of our meetup story. Well, he's definitely instrumental in our meeting story, and I want to maybe allow him to tell part of it. The other is I'm having a new series, and it's going to be part of a push to get you guys a little bit more content here in the month of June. I felt like I slacked a little bit in May, and really want to end season one with a bang, and also with the eye that maybe this series can keep everyone, locked in on New Dad while we do some new things and remodel a little bit for season two, and that is story time with Uncle Tickles. Um, Perhaps one of these stories, or perhaps the meeting story, will be something Lita would want to come on and tell. So there's two different opportunities where the story will be told. I promise, if for some reason neither of those things come to fruition, we'll tell the story at the last on the last episode of that last progress report episode. However, we decide to do that, could be in the form of a live stream. So hold on to your butts for that announcement. But yeah, I'm sorry. I don't want to get too much. I will say that we did, and I don't think this is spoiling anything. Maybe more so a teaser. We did meet at a wonderful little bar and grill in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, called Papa Corey's. Very near and dear to my heart. And there was a 10-year gap where just basically radio silence. Um, so yeah, I won't say the rest, but that is a true story.
And I don't know. Okay, so this next question, Patrick, and I think this is Patrick from, he's in the New Dad Facebook group, and he's also someone I know from a few other Facebook groups. Um, I don't know if I mentioned it on the show here or if I just mentioned it somewhere else, but it says, tell us more about the movie club you are doing. So I am doing a movie club with, the my best friends from high school that I've mentioned a few times now, Suds, Flynn, and Jenrick. Flynn and Jenrick, you guys have seen on a couple episodes. I don't know how it necessarily started. Uh, I think it's, we were all fans of the podcast Rewatchables, and we would talk about episodes as they would come up in our chat thread. And at some point, someone was like, we should do something like this just for fun. Just pick a movie, we all watch it, then we can all talk about it. Each member of the group would come to a nominating session with two actors. We would put them on the wheel that's right over my shoulder here, and they would spin the wheel, and with all of us putting the two actors in, it's totally full, so you can see if you have eagle eyes and can read my 10 martini handwriting. That's Danny DeVito, John Candy, DDL, who's Daniel Day-Lewis, and then Schwartzman for Jason Schwartzman. So we spin the wheel, and then you assign an actor based on who the wheel lands on. It's been a ton of fun, and I hope it's something we keep going after all the lockdowns, and because it's cool to text your buddies, but to be able to get on that, and we all are kind of spread out across the U.S., and it is for an hour, like we get to hang out, and I'm glad you asked, because I hope it inspires other groups to do similar stuff. It's been a lot of fun, and thank you for asking about that, Patrick. William from New Jersey, who I think is the creator of the Food Geeks Facebook group. I've seen you post a lot recently in the Facebook group Food Geeks. What would be your idea of the perfect meal? This is a excellent question. I love food. I think about it a lot. First things first, my perfect meal. This might shock some people, because New Dad loves the kiddos, but the perfect meal does not involve kids. The kids are out, and I'm not eating kids, so they're not involved in any form or fashion in my perfect meal. And I went back and forth with this a little bit as far as a perfect meal versus my last meal. I'm gonna go with the way you worded it and said perfect meal, because my last meal would essentially be an all-you-can-eat buffet of just a bunch of really obvious shit like gyros and Chinese food and pasta and Diet Coke. Um, so my perfect meal. My perfect meal starts with a perfect group or a perfect meal partners. Um, I love Lita, but I always feel like the best dynamic for that sort of thing involves more than one person. Um, so I don't know what the perfect number is, but for this, I'm going to say there's 8 people, including myself and my wife. So 6 other people. Um, I'm not going to go as far as to try to pick the 6 perfect dinner guests, but so for me, you have to have, I think, multiple starters. So I want to do this justice. So for my starters, I want to have a soup. Give me a potato and leek soup, and for my appetizer, give me some sort of actually give me shrimp cocktail, um, and give me that St. Elmo's cocktail sauce. So that's going to be my starters, and then I'm going to go with we're going to go with some rack of lamb, some whipped potatoes, a pan sauce over the potatoes on the rack, and then some Brussels sprouts on the side with a salad as well. I need a salad, and then my a dessert. I think we're gonna go with. We're gonna go with. I mean, how do you go wrong with cherry pie and ice cream? Someone probably going to be very upset that there's no chocolate in that dessert. Someone might be my wife, but this is my perfect meal. So we're going to go with that. And that perfect meal does include wine pairings with everything. So I probably wouldn't be the best person to speak to the wine pairings. I would imagine there'd be some sort of whites to go with the soup and the shrimp, a full-bodied red to go with the rack of lamb, and then a whole bunch of bourbon afterwards. That would be my perfect meal. So thank you, William, for that. Now we have Pete, Wisconsin, asking, are you okay with letting a computer TV screen be a babysitter, spending a lot of time in front of one so mom and dad can get things done? And will you let the boys play football? There's a third question that he submitted as well. Will you bribe them with money to do what you want? Let's start with that one, because bribe is such an ugly word. And I think in the world, there's a lot of places where you get paid to do what other people want, and they don't call it a bribe, they call it a paycheck. So that's how I would frame it. It's let's prepare you for the real world, and you have a job, and your job earns you a salary. As long as you're doing your job up to everyone's expectations, you get that salary. And if you start to slack, we'll have to talk, and then maybe after a while we'll have to renegotiate your salary, or perhaps you're fired, and then you're looking for work again. So I mean, I absolutely think that's. I don't think that that's bad. Now, if you're asking me if I will pay the kid $20 to keep quiet so he doesn't tell his mom that we went to McDonald's for lunch, I'm also not above that. So even though it is an ugly word, it's an ugly word that I'm not prepared to freely give away from my arsenal. Now, as for will I let the boys play football? Yeah, I do. I will. And I'm saying that as someone who's starting at 38 years old to truly feel the ramifications of playing football for as long as I did. And my body aches, my neck is horrible, my lower back, my shoulders. It's brutal, but still. With that being said, it was there's very little I've done, with the exception of being a dad and meeting my wife, that's ever compared. And in some ways, football can never compare to being a dad, or to being in love, with someone that you mutually respect and is your best friend. But there's other ways that those two things could never, there's itches that those two things, like the physicality of it, the camaraderie you can find in a family, right? And that's really part of it. But the thrill of the physicality of it, that's really hard to find. And I'm probably, you go out and do mixed martial arts or boxing or something like that, and sure, you could definitely make the argument that you can find those things. But those are both individual sports, so the mix of the thrill, the physicality with a team sport, I think that's what's hard to match. And then you combine that with the fact that, for those grade school and high school years, those are kids that I grew up with. These are my best friends. These are kids, or guys that I'm still friends with that have been on the podcast. Um, so yeah, I mean, I would certainly support that, and I would hope that by the time they're playing football and the conversations we're having now, that if there is still football, then they found a way to make it significantly safer. Um, so yeah, I would certainly let it. And I also think that to a large degree in those early ages, I mean, those kids, you watch those games, they're almost comical because there's not hitting happening that's going to cause the sort of damage that you're fearing. I don't think that really starts to take place. Maybe, you might have a couple kids at the 7th and 8th grade level who are doing it on a consistent basis, but then you get into high school and that's when you have to consider it. So yes, I would do that. And then so I'm working these answers back in the reverse order. Are you okay with letting a computer and TV screen be a babysitter? Um, so we had a whole episode on screen time, and I am certainly on the more lenient side of this. My point is, I think deep down inside, as a parent, you kind of have an idea, right? In your gut, if it's too much or if it's too not, or if it's too much or if it's not too much. And there'll be days that are more than others, and I'll hit a point. I'm like, that's too much. Like, let's cut it off. Let's turn everything off. Let's either listen to music or let's play. Let's go outside. Some other activity outside of watching a screen. So, I like to think if you're listening to a parenting podcast, you're probably ahead of most in the common sense department with kids. But at the same time, that's probably a pretty shitty answer, but I would lean on that. And just know that, especially in a time like this where parents are working at home, daycares are opening in a lot of places, but perhaps you live somewhere where they're not. Or you've been working from home for the last 2 or 3 months while they haven't been. That's 100% understandable and acceptable, and you shouldn't beat yourself up over that. These are weird, strange, outlying times, and I don't think we should be judging ourselves by how we've been trying to get by during them. So I hope that helps, Pete. Jeff from Illinois asks, do you have any tips for living on a third floor apartment and having a kid? And also, how do you travel out of the country with a baby? I actually think that the answer to both of these questions, luckily, is pretty similar, and that's booze. So you're going to want to get pretty lubricated for life with on the third floor with a kid and traveling with a baby. So make sure you got a nice stiff drink, or if you prefer to get high, then you're going to want to get high. The second thing, again, like these, it's true for both cases. You're going to want to get in good with your neighbors. So the people in front of you on that plane and the people below you on that house. You might want to buy them some booze yourself, just preemptively before any of the ruckus happens. So if it's too late, if you already are on that third floor and your neighbors already hate you, then you might as well just say fuck it and move. Just don't even worry about the lease running out, and pack your shit and just get out now. So, Ashley from Illinois, what is the most terrifying thing about being a dad? What moments have had you thinking, shit, did I just mess up my kid? Oh, another question. Do you believe in happy wife, happy life? As for the most terrifying thing about being a dad, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you asked the question, shit, did I just mess up my kid? And that's really what every parent's trying to avoid is messing up their kids. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that, and that's pretty terrifying. And it starts with naming your kid. We talk about the weight of naming your kid in one of our previous episodes for baby names, where we chose a name for our second son using the wheel right off my shoulder that we used for our movie night. And we had our guests, Rory Berg and Peter Bell, for that, which was a very excellent episode with a hilarious game at the end. I think if you haven't caught that one, you should go back and watch it. And that's a good one to watch on YouTube for the game specifically. So for me personally, like moments that I thought like, shit, did I just mess up my kid? Shep's only 2, but there have been a couple. The very first one I remember, and I put it somewhere on social media, but this is when he was still pretty immobile. I think he was in one of those baby Bjorn chairs, and I was getting ready for work, trying to get out the door, get him to daycare. We had music going, and he was being real fussy. And I do remember I was changing. He was fussing. I was trying to dance, trying to make him laugh. And halfway through that whole thing, I kind of realized that I was doing a striptease for my son. And there was this moment where I stopped and I was like, fuck, am I fucking him up right now? Is this weird? So that was the first moment. Moment number 2, I talked about on the episode with Kate Flynn, where we talk about the art that's getting us through the quarantine. And that was also weirdly, kind of a similar moment with my son Shep, where we were in the tub. He was fixated on my junk, and at the time I thought the best move was to tuck it, and he became super interested and curious as to where it had went, and I think that actually made things worse. And so when I would see him, he was looking for it. He wanted me to show it to him, and it was just I wondered for a short period if I had fucked him up, but that's just typical kids curiosity. So those are the moments, but I'm sure the way we fuck up our kids is much more subtle and probably over a much more gradual period of time. It's rare that it's just a one real shocking, jarring moment that did it. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. As for happy wife, happy life, yeah, I mean, if we stop and are really honest about life, and we look at these situations where it's a parent, a spouse, a roommate, a boss, these people who you are interacting with for long periods of time in very close quarters, many times you're having to collaborate, many times perhaps taking orders from these individuals. It's way better when that person's happy, right? So I think when I hear someone ask this, well, what I'm really hearing in that question is, do you think you should compromise everything just to make a person happy? And to that I would say no. I will say happy wife, happy life if your wife or husband or whoever you choose to connect yourself to is treating you with respect and is returning your love. Yeah, then absolutely. And they're making every good faith effort to be a good partner to you. Absolutely. Happy wife, happy life. So I hope that helps, Ashley. Chris from Wisconsin. This is a pretty lengthy question. I won't read the whole thing, but it says, I remember a while back you told me about the Neuralink. It's an implantable brain-machine interface to enhance cognition that Elon Musk is working with. And he goes on to talk quite a bit about some of the potential pitfalls of this, as well as advantages. And then goes on to ask if the product is available in 10 years, will Pappas be getting the Neuro BrainLink implants? Fuck yes. I mean, if you've seen the movie Gattaca, then I think you kind of see the writing on the wall where this is going. He also asked, did I cut the umbilical cords? This is another thing we talked about in the Jono and Tommy Doherty episode that we most recently released. No, I didn't. That's totally something that I'm sure a lot of dudes have done, and I know a lot of people do, but I don't do well with that sort of thing, so I did not do it. Chris has one more question. What is your personal favorite costume that you yourself wore, and what is one you saw in someone else and thought, "Fuck, I wish I would have thought of that"? This is another one where I'll answer the last part first. So as far as seeing something that I thought, "Fuck, I wish I thought of that," I don't know that I've ever seen an outfit someone's wearing and thought that. Um, I can think of an outfit that I wasn't able to put together that I had in my mind that it kind of eats at me that I was never able to make it work. So there's something, there's more than one, but one that immediately jumps to mind, and that's probably fits this. And this isn't an outfit, but we call them Lollapalooza lighthouses. I'm sure there's another name for them, but we went to a Lollapalooza one year, and the reason we call them Lolla lighthouses is on a huge flagpole, someone had this just one of the owls that people use to scare away rodents. And it was great because it was a point of reference. So if you were standing near that group, you could always tell your friends, "I'm right by the giant owl in the sky." You could text that, they could find you. We realized the brilliancy in this, and the people we were with probably weren't the originators of this. I've seen them, festivals everywhere. So somewhere they got popular, and so that year we made, I believe, a broomstick with a bunch of dollar store baby heads on it. And that became our little Lala lighthouse that didn't go very far. Um, so I wish I was the originator of that idea. It's a really brilliant idea, and it kind of works into your question about my favorite outfit because the next year we decided to really upgrade our Lala Lighthouse game. So we made a giant sign that said it had uh, Amanda Bynes painted on it in like a saint, kind of like one of those Latin candles that you would see, the saint candles. So it was in that kind of vein. And the sign said, "Get rich or Bynes trying." And with that outfit, I wore nude leggings and an oversized gray T-shirt that had the sleeves cut off of it. And that outfit and sign got a lot of recognition that year. We got picked up by a bunch of different websites: MTV, a Barstool, um, Buzzworthy, and maybe Huffington Post. Either way, it was popular with the people, with the press. But my favorite part about that outfit wasn't the recognition it got, but it was later. Fast forward to about maybe 7 or 8 p.m. It was starting to get a little dark, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, some dude comes and shoves me, and he's fucking hammered. And all he's able to get out a few times before we're separated is, "Fucking, what the fuck are you doing? Put your pants on." And he gets pulled away. A couple people from his group had stepped over, and they're immediately apologetic, and they're apologizing over and over. The guy had legitimately thought that I was just sitting there with no pants, which we could stop and debate whether or not I should have been shoved if that was really the case. If I just wore a long T-shirt that wasn't allowing anything to be seen by anybody, then I don't necessarily know if physical violence was justified anyway. But it was such a well done combination, just the idea, because that was obviously what I was going for. I wanted to look like I was just wearing a long T-shirt and no pants, and it was achieved so well that someone tried to fight me over it. So that will go down as one of my favorites, and I'm sure I'm forgetting just so many. And if there are listeners in there that are recognizing one or two that I've forgotten, be sure to hit me either at the Gmail newdadpod at gmail.com or in our Facebook group. So Chris, thanks for those questions. One last question, and this is a doozy. So John from Singapore asks, "What's your most embarrassing story growing up that still sticks with you?" That question in and of itself is nothing out of the ordinary, but John goes on. Now, John couldn't just stop at a question. For example, my mom catching me jerking off because in the 90s we had one computer in the hallway area, or my brother spying and secretly recording me jerking off with his VHS camcorder. Well, John, I don't have anything that embarrassing. The first story that came to mind, and I thought about this for a while, trying to think if there was anything worse than this. Two stories jump to mind. First story is I had to be maybe fifth grade, and my parents had bought a dog or got a dog when I was born, and that dog had lived with me my entire life and had passed away around third or fourth grade. And I remember sitting around our kitchen table after the dog had passed away, and I can't remember how long, but it wasn't that long after the dog had passed away. And my brother and my sister start making fun of me and the dog, and I got so worked up that I had thrown up at the dinner table, and then they started laughing. I mean, they thought it was the funniest thing because I was mad. It was just so many. I was so overcome with emotion, and so I went to storm out of the room. And on my way to storm out of the room, I shat my pants. Because it wasn't as if I was sitting there before they started making fun of them and I had this feeling of diarrhea or impending poo. It was just, the emotions opened up the floodgates, and literally the floodgates were opening on both ends. So that one, because I was wearing gray sweatpants, and it was just one of those things where it immediately was very apparent to both of them that I'd shat my pants. So that one's super embarrassing. The other one that sticks with me, and this one's maybe like more traumatizing than embarrassing, but I was in first grade. Maybe in the first 2 weeks, the teacher had a knock on the door, and it was another teacher, and she stepped outside to take that conversation. Well, she didn't know that I had been holding in a piss for a very long time, and was waiting for her to finish up before I could ask, if I could be excused to go to the washroom. Well, now that she leaves, now I really have to go, and I don't have the opportunity to ask her. And I was too timid to go interrupt her and ask her if I could use the washroom. So I sat there, and I remember getting to the point where my leg was furiously shaking under my desk, and I'm trying desperately not to go, and hoping any second she's going to come back, and she doesn't. And eventually I pissed my pants, and there was an enormous puddle under my desk, and she came back. And, to her credit, I remember what stuck with me was the genuine feeling of just how horrible she felt, which honestly did make it a little bit better. But that, and what's crazy is I don't remember, I don't know if she covered up for me or, I don't remember it being like a big, all of a sudden, everyone's pointing and everyone's laughing. But man, that was one that probably didn't do me any favors. And really, I was a weird kid or one of the weird kids, for another 3 or 4 years, really, at least. Yeah, thanks for sharing your experience there, John from Singapore. And it's a doozy. Thank you, John. That wraps up the questions we have from our fans, and I think that we will have another episode here for you. I'm trying to set up a few different recordings, and as I said, we've already recorded a story time. So whether it be a story time or a new episode, hoping to get one out to you this weekend. So stay tuned for that. Uncle Tickles loves you. I appreciate everyone listening. Don't forget to rate and review, as I said at the top of the show. It really helps out a lot. And we will talk to you soon.